My name is Randy James, and so I am first of all, grateful. Thank you, September, for allowing me to be here. And I'm a functional medicine doc, trained as an MD up in Woodland Park. Have been doing that for about 10 years. Came out of a traditional family practice background and 10 years in the military, and so kind of did what I would call normal American medicine, and then shifted away from that into the functional world, sort of transitioning over 3 years or so, and then for about the last 5 years have been just doing only that. Many of you will understand if you've been into any kind of integrative medicine at all. So we transitioned out of an insurance-based practice into a membership-based practice. And that has allowed us a little bit more freedom and a lot more relational contact with people. So that's where I'm coming from. And secondly, in terms of thank yous, I'd like to thank you guys. So the fact that you're here, and I will say right up front, I have not had to walk down the pathway of infertility on my own, but have walked as a doc along with people. That has not been a primary part of our practice, but it's been, and I can also say it's been a fun part because there have been mostly good outcomes. But I wanted to thank you, and this is my first conference, my first engagement specifically with infertility, and so as I have been talking with people and as I did a little bit of research for this, it's a different world. It's frustrating, it's tender, it's painful, and so thank you guys for being here. And I do think I can empathize on one hand, being the father of a son who also has a metabolic dysregulation, an autoimmune disorder, and so both of us then are walking along every day, and in my son's case, he's got a physical situation, and so every day I'm reminded something's not right. This is not normal. And I see my 8-year-old growing up with this realization, and he is now wrestling with, I'm different. And of course it tenders me all up, and I'm wondering how he's thinking. So now both of us, and on the other hand, all of us, you guys too and me as a dad, I'm saying, well, what did I do? What could I have done differently in the past to have equaled a different outcome? And then on a hopeful day, it's like, all right, here we go. This time around, this will make a difference. And every day you're reminded about these things. So today is not about me. And I appreciate the fact that you need to understand where I'm coming from. But the hero of this story is you. And I do want to kind of continually reemphasize that today is about you, and you need to be able to conceive of yourselves as the hero of this story. And I would like to put out a little bit of not a disagreement with anything that has been said today, but a nuance towards the idea that pregnancy and a baby at home isn't the main hero of the story, but you are. Because my son's health and your baby can't be guaranteed, ever. We might die on a car wreck on the way home. We all know this, but transitioning and at least being allowed to incorporate the idea that you are the hero of this story. And so in becoming that person, this next hour's question is, well, what do we think about nutrition? And we'll get down into the specifics of that. So as I was thinking more about infertility, I'm wondering, I got a little bit frustrated by the fact that every infertility site and website tends to always end up with a picture of a happy mom and a healthy baby, or a frustrated mom looking at one of these stripes, and then there's pain. And so you are walking through the rock and the hard place of irrational hope, which seems like pie in the sky sometimes, or irrational despair. And as we begin to talk about nutrition, I want to lay the groundwork and invite you into a pathway that I would say is maybe something in between, something that is a sweet pain, if you will. There is no such thing as no pain, and there is no such thing as 100% pain relief. But between these, the rock and the hard place, I do think that there is a pathway of pain that is painful, but is navigable. And as we begin to walk into that pathway, it requires patience and wisdom and maturity and consistency. And the problem is we live in a culture where nobody wants to buy that book title. You know, come walk with me over the next 8 years, as Danny, I think he said, you know, as we try this and try that and have hope and don't have hope. And every web post is the 5 easy secrets to XYZ and 7 steps to ABC, and then the picture of happy mom and happy baby at the end. Happy couple. I'm sorry if I speak more female terms than male terms, but it's all of us. And in fact, I would say whether you have somebody is in your family with an autoimmune dysregulation or not, nobody in here is as well as they could be. Nobody out there is either. You guys are on your particular journey. So that's the context I will speak about nutrition in, is trying to navigate this pathway of sweet pain. And so I invite you to walk with me into this not very fun pathway, but it is a good pain. Pain is a blessing. It tells you to get your hand off the hot plate. But when you don't know why it's there, it's called torture. And that's hard. And so everybody, and if you're in the cancer world, the diabetes world, the overweight world, or the infertility world, you go out there and there's a long list of eat this and don't eat that, do this and don't do that, and have sex this way and stand on your head and jump up and down 3 times, and at the end is a picture of a happy mom and a healthy baby and all of that. So there's this. I do think that today is a day of hope, and there are miracles and that kind of thing, but we have to acknowledge too that there's a lot of not miracles, and it's okay. So from the beginning, I want to put another layer on top of the baby, the happy baby at home, and say you are the hero of the story. And what I want to share with you today, I know will help you to be becoming a better you. And in fact, one of my favorite questions for humans to ask of themselves, and if people are coming to me as a patient, then it's in a patient's category, and I would say, okay, how does one be becoming the kind of person that gives them more and more likelihood of being the kind of person they want to be? So let me restate that. How do you be becoming the kind of person that you want to be? How do you eat, live, think, breathe, go to work, not go to work, in such a way as to give your body more of what it needs to be becoming the kind of person you want to be? And of course, everybody is going to say, I want to be a mom, I want to be a dad. But more than a mom and a dad, you're a you. And so the best you that you can be cannot be guaranteed to get pregnant or to impregnate. But you can be becoming the kind of person you want to be, regardless of child or no child. It is possible. And then when you hit year 3 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 maybe, you are still more likely to be a better you, child or not. So that's my context. That's my long introduction to say, How then do we begin to think about this? With this hard book to sell, nobody wants to buy a book that says, to the pain. But I invite you into this painful pathway. It's an uphill pathway, but it's a good pain because it will help you to be becoming a better you. So before we talk specifically about nutrition, nutrition can't happen by itself. You're going to put that food into a body. That body has relationships and all of these other things. And as I've talked with the other presenters out here, I've been impressed with how they are also bringing in all these other factors and everybody, so we're all reiterating those things. And so the framework that I want to share with you today is a framework. It's an infrastructure. And I hope that, and we're going to have the recordings available, but nobody's going to remember everything, but I want you to be able to come back and remember these things. And I will stop and repeat and reiterate some things that I think are worthy of just sticking in your brain. And so, after I just got done saying that there is no algorithm, right? There's just not. So, right after saying that, I'm going to give you a framework. It's not a concrete algorithm. And so picture with me in your minds, and this is something you should remember, that we are standing on the edge of this Olympic-sized swimming pool, and there are those lane dividers. We've all seen that. They're movable. You can go over them and under them. It's a malleable kind of thing, but the point is, pregnancy is over there, or a better you. You want to lose a little weight, run a little faster, do an extra push-up, work better at work. The improved you is over there, and in this group we're talking about that might include a family, okay? And so the framework is that, well, here's a lane, and one of these lanes, and I'm going to give you 4 lanes. The first one is input, what you put in your mouth. But I want to already say, oh my gosh, this already breaks down because input is so complex. It's not just what you put in your mouth, but what do you put in your eyes? What do you put in your ears? What is being generated in you internally as a stress response? If you have a stress response that even the whole lack of pregnancy is a stress response, and how you respond to that creates cortisol, creates these hormonal signals, that's a form of input. So you can change an input by changing your stress response. Now that is easy to say and very hard to do. It takes a long time, and I'm always going to use the future progressive tense. You can be changing. I would never, and I would encourage you, don't ever tell yourself I should change, because you already are. It's just which way are you changing? You're going to jump in this pool, and we want you to have a forward movement, and the lane markers are going to help you directionally. Okay, I want to say one other thing on input about ears. How many of us in this room grew up under words that sounded like, you're not worthy, you should this, and you shouldn't that? And how many of us in here, which means all of us, have some of the echoes of those words bouncing around between your ears still? That is another form of input. You cannot change what words went in, but you can be changing how you respond to these words starting today. And I promise you, it won't be fast, and you are signing up for a long road, and it's uphill. It just is. Okay, second lane is output. So if you're going to be a human, you got to put things in, you got to eat, got to drink. Secondly, output. So traditionally out here, input is mostly talked about as food, and secondly, output would be exercise. You should just eat right and exercise, right? Output is much more than exercise. It's what's your work? What do you do? How do you put yourself out there? What's your posture? Or are you a little bit not putting yourself out there? Is there a little bit of a protective mechanism going on? And the answer is yes in all of us. But how is that impacting, in this case, becoming the kind of person that can conceive, or is less likely to. Number 3, if you have an input, if you have an output, you must have recovery. And we don't. In our culture, we don't teach this. We don't coach it. And number 1 is sleep. And by sleep, I don't mean go to bed. I mean rhythmic, restful, real, efficient, oxygenated sleep where you wake up refreshed. So already there's a problem. Culturally, we don't do that very well. There must be rest with a capital R. And I don't mean relaxation, a couple hours in front of the TV on a Friday night with a good movie and a nice bowl of ice cream. That's okay, but that isn't real rest. That is not rejuvenating, recuperating. There must be a moment in your day when you can actually say, like we breathe this morning, where there's a, I'm okay. Even if we don't have a kid, I'm okay. I'm safe, I'm secure, and I'm okay. And how many people in our society today are not safe in their own home? Not secure financially or in their neighborhood? There then is another input into their system of, if I'm not safe, here comes the cortisol surge, here comes an HPA axis dysregulation, there goes sex hormone binding globulin climbing up, there goes testosterone going down, and this is going on every second of every day, and you're either slightly improving or slightly not. And so we want to increase your awareness as to these things. So here's a framework to think about it. Input, output, recovery, and relationships. Relationships, and the reason I use that word is because you first have a relationship with yourself. Your own mind-body connection that we talked about this morning, and I would put another one in there, your mind-body-soul connection. How do you think about yourself? Secondly, with God. Thirdly, your spouse, your family. Fourthly, your community. So these relationships are feeding back into you, giving your body physiologic information that is increasing the chance of pregnancy or decreasing. So input, output, recovery, and relationships. And so we have this idea of a pool that is malleable. This is a framework that is dynamic. Another idea that I will continually refer back to is, think of those 4 areas as the cornerstones of your foundation. And upon this rock, so to speak, your input, your output, your recovery, your relationships, you are building you. And you are building, how do you be becoming the kind of you that is a better you? Maybe that is a you that can conceive or impregnate, that can run a faster mile, that can do a better job. All of these things. And so you're the hero of that story. And is there a chance that there is a take-home baby at the end of that? And I would say absolutely. But we all are walking this pathway of sweet pain. There's no perfect algorithm. And so there's our framework. The framework that allows us to pull out then, now we go on to that one cornerstone of input. We talked about the complexity of input, the fact that it's not just what you put in your mouth. And we've got a vendor downstairs that, what do you put on your skin? You know, this is another form of input. What kind of water is flowing through your home? Nobody can live in a perfect environment. So you've got to begin the process of increasing your awareness about your environment, but nobody in here can afford to buy, $50 face cream all the time and $1,000 home filter and on and on and on the list goes. And it's so frustrating because you guys are in that space of pain and desperation, willing to pay whatever. And I get it, me too. So you have to make wise choices as best you can. I want to help you think now through that lens of input. Nutrition we're going to talk about specifically today, but we can't not talk about the stress response. So I mentioned it briefly already. And one of those things that I would encourage you to remember and write down that I think is a fair statement is, don't blame anything on stress. If I were to ask you what's the opposite of stress, what's the first word in your mind? The opposite of stress is peace. This is number one. Number two? Relax is number two, and then a whole host after that. But peace and relaxation, those are by far what people will say. Can I tell you what my answer is? The perfect opposite of stress over here is death. If you're alive, you got to get out of bed. You got to go through the stress of, well, what do I eat today? As I'm trying to eat right. How do I exercise today? If you're married, who in here has an unstressful marriage? Who in here is totally at peace with infertility? Life is stress. So you can blame partially your stress response, but stop this blame stress, because otherwise your only option is not a good option. And that's why people look into a wine bottle, or they go buy a new pair of shoes, or 1,000. We blunt our pain in so many ways. But don't blame stress. So stress is life, but you can train yourself into a better stress response. That is a form of input. If you're not doing that, you are training yourself into a worse stress response. And again, nobody in here needs to walk around with cortisol thoughts and HPA axis and all of that. You can chase those labs around, but the bottom line is, how are you going to become the kind of person who has a stress response that's a little bit better than it was yesterday? If you demand of yourself to change, you'll fail, as we all have. If you give yourself the opportunity to train, don't try and fail, train. Think of it no different than if I stuck a golf club in your hand and said, go. You say, well, I'm not any good. I'd say, well, I know that. How are you going to get better? There's only one way. Okay, so the stress response, we'll speak more about that later if we have time. I want to say a little bit about fasting, because fasting does not seem like an input. But we do not live in a fasting culture. And as a consequence, most of us never get the kind of hormones and biochemicals that only are generated by not eating for a while. And already, everybody's heart rate goes up, and you're like, oh my gosh, what? It's so funny, because if I invite people into fasting, and I don't mean 7 days, but it doesn't matter what I mean. People think that whatever their long fast is, 1 hour longer is inconceivable. But that's the only way to get the input of those kinds of hormone, and is it helpful in the infertility space? And the answer is yes. And then we'll say a word about supplements. Okay, that was the introduction. Finally, we're here to talk about nutrition. Point number one, it really matters. You can't get away from the fact that it does matter. And we all make that choice every day, eat this or eat that. And everybody in here knows I should eat healthy. And so one of those things I think you should write down and throw away this word, don't say the word healthy. Can anybody in here define what healthy nutrition is? And then I can go down the list of vegetarian and vegan and South Beach and eat right for your blood type and vegetarian and paleo and keto and which one's right? Are the vegetarians right? Or are they wrong? You cannot know. And in fact, I would say it's the wrong question. So stop asking it. If you ask a question that has an infinite variety of answers and no one specific answer, then stop asking that question. What does it mean to eat right? And so here's the question. How do I eat in such a way as to give my body more of what it needs to have more and more of a chance of becoming the kind of person I want to be? And the answer I would give you is, I don't know, because you're you. And so how frustrating is that? So we get to embark then together on a journey of lefts and rights and ups and downs that's foggy out there, and you cannot see the end of it, but you can try to illuminate the next few steps. Should I eat this way? Should I eat that way? And I think that's a valid question. And all of us in here have experience of how we have eaten, And some ways work and some ways don't, but what's the right way? And I get it. We all have to make this change, and our house is going through yet another change, as your house is too. So at the risk of stating oversimplified things, because anything I say about nutrition is automatically oversimplified, because nobody has their own personal lab in their home to test their glucose every minute of the day, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So at the risk of being oversimplified and too algorithmic, here are some points that I think for a big audience we can say, here's some general ideas. These, you don't have to go read another book. You don't have to understand biochemistry. Here's some general ideas that I think are going to be valid for most people. Number one, we live in a carbohydrate, sugar, crazy country. All right? There it is. So, are carbohydrates bad for you? They could be. Are all carbs bad? Too much of anything can be bad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, point number one, I want to encourage you is to cross that line and say, okay, as a couple, as an individual, whatever, but if you're a couple, as a couple, cross the line, find somebody to help you, and just do it. And I'm so sorry, because saying just do it does not consider your emotions, your food addictions, who said what to you when you were 10 and 12, the kinds of abuse that have happened in the past, the connection between those things and food addiction are well known. And so in that context, now we're going to jump over into another lane of relationship. What's your relationship with food? Because we all have one. And so increase your sense of self-awareness. Get somebody to help you. Begin the process. Draw a line in the sand and say, tomorrow I'll have less carbs. So truisms, I think we can say, cut out the sugar. Cut out the processed carbs. Those are, I was almost going to say easy cutouts. It's not easy. And I remember the day after my older son had his diagnosis, the next day in church was some ice cream social day, and we dragged our kid kicking and screaming out of the church because the Saturday before we had drawn our line. And there it began, the war. And I'm so sorry. But you have to walk with that together with all your people. Get a nutritionist, get a psychologist, get a counselor, and begin the process. Cut the carbs. And today I didn't go into, don't eat Doritos and do eat these, because I think everybody knows that in a sense, and I just didn't want to get into lists of things like that. So get some help, get a nutritionist, begin a plan. There's 1,000 books. Just begin one. I would encourage you to, I'll stop there. Draw a line in the sand, begin a less carb emphasis plan. Now, when most people do that, hang on a second, I skipped my whole, I was going to make a point on each one of these ideas. So is a lower carb diet, when we do randomized controls trials and observational studies and these kind of things, is there strong evidence that that will help you to be becoming the kind of person who's more likely to be pregnant? Yes. So higher carb problems, increasing overweight, increasing obesity, increasing insulin resistance, increasing PCOS, all of which are going to have pressure on the fertility situation. There's pretty much no doubt about that. So without giving you the name of a diet or something, less carbohydrates, and certainly I would say no processed or refined carbohydrates. When people step into that lower carb world, they tend to step into the world of, I'm going to increase my fat and my protein. And I would say be careful. A low carb diet does not mean that you have to go and eat a mastodon every day for lunch. So, people don't eat a mastodon, but how many times a day do I hear, well, I'll eat a chicken breast, piece of chicken and something. Okay. Point number 2, the emphasis after less carb is going to be fill in that gap with vegetables. Just Just do that. We won't talk about low glycemic load and glycemic index and that kind of thing. If you lower the carbs, and if you say, well, I'm not full enough, have some more broccoli. Fill yourself up with some more broccoli. That's fine. It is well established also in our country. We don't live in a broccoli culture, but we don't live in a vegetable culture. Are most of us overcarbed and undervegetabled? Yes. So begin those two processes. Make that switch. And again, is that going to be true for all people at all time? No. If there's the infertile couple over here and there's a high endurance athlete and maybe somebody is over thin, well, we might have something different to say about that. But for most of us, we're on the other side of things. Less carbs, higher vegetables, no mastodons. So it's quite easy for people, even good carbs, right? So my son, who's 13, and so, in our culture, it's like, oh, he's 13, he gets to eat anything he wants all day long. And we're doing steel-cut oats for breakfast in the morning and all this kind of stuff, but he doesn't just get to eat ad nauseum. There's a stop. It's easy to overeat carbs, even the good ones. It's easy to overeat fat, even the good ones. I promise you, I have never told anybody, ma'am, you really need to cut back on your broccoli. So I challenge you to overeat broccoli. I doubt it's going to cause a problem. Maybe it will, but number 3, fat. So we have lived for decades in this fat controversy, low fat, good fat, bad fat, all of that kind. From my perspective, over the last 5 to 10 years, to me the controversy is far less controversial. The issue isn't, is fat bad for you? The clear answer is bad fat is bad for you, and good fat is good for you, and don't eat too much. Okay, so at the risk of being too algorithmic, be conscientious and be increasing your awareness on what bad fat means. And by the way, most things labeled as low fat tend to be not the kind of fat that you want to be eating anyway. So there's nothing healthy about low fat Doritos or whatever. And there's nothing really to fear about an avocado. And, saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, again, nobody walks around with these terms in their head. If you can go towards natural on the vegetable side of fats and say, well, sure, an avocado has a wide fat signature, the seeds and nuts and those kind of things, and I would say yes, emphasize the good fats. Strongly de-emphasize and eliminate the bad fats, to make a list of those. Again, almost anything labeled as low fat, but certainly the vegetable oils, the Crisco, Wesson, corn oils, those kind of things I think you can write down to say, okay, don't do that. That's an easy one. Any kind of animal fat that is coming through a fast food window is not going to give you the kind of fat signature that is going to be on the good side. And so any of it on the bad side is you are going to be becoming less of the kind of person you could have been becoming. And so on the animal side, so on the vegetable side of things, the avocados, coconuts, seeds and nuts. On the animal side, I think the most important thing to remember there, and so I will always refer to happy cows. Eat happy cows. And by that we mean 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. Eat happy fish. They're wild-caught. Chickens that are pasture-raised and eggs from those chickens. If you're going to eat animals, eat happy ones. And so now everybody who's ever tried to do that knows your cost doubled or tripled. Eat less of them. Go eat some more broccoli. Or spend the money. But to say, well, we can't afford that. I say, well, I get it, me too. We're all on a budget. But if you've got a goal to get across the other side and you want to know how to get from here to there, these are the kinds of things that you can say, just do that. And of course, you don't have to eat any of those expensive animals. I'm not a vegetarian. Again, I don't think there's any one right way. And once you think you found the right way, I hate to tell you this, but you'll be a day older tomorrow and it'll change. And your kids are going to change, and all this, their family changes, you move away, all of those kind of things are happening. So, on the fat side, yes, eat some. Make sure it's good and completely avoid the bad. Lower carb, increase your vegetables, good fats in general. Let me say a word about supplements. And supplements are frustrating, and they, in my opinion, I think they tend to be overemphasized. And people want a quick and easy way around this long, hard, steep road called eat more broccoli. And you just can't. So the first thing to write down about supplements is remember that supplements are supplemental. If you think that you're going to create a foundation and one of your cornerstones is going to be supplements, you will crumble. And that's just the way it is. So supplements are supplemental. If you're not addressing these 4 other areas, and you are addressing them, it's just how are you addressing them, then people tend to lean on a supplement and it just can't handle that weight. It's trying to build a house on a not good foundation. I don't think that they're ever worthless. But the question is, how worthwhile are you helping them to be? Into what context do you put a supplement so that it can supplement you to go and achieve becoming the kind of person you want to be? Okay, with that in mind, the famous supplements and the ones that I think are worthy of emphasizing, everybody, well, I don't want to presume things, so folic acid has been well established with regard to neural tube defects and that kind of thing. So prenatal vitamins, they're always going to have the folic acid supplement in there, and I would say, okay, great. But 2 big areas to think about that I think deserve some change. Let me say 3. Number 1 is go eat your folate. Guess where you get it?
Broccoli.
Yes, green leafy vegetables, including broccoli. So with all supplements, go eat the thing. That's number 1. Number 2, I would recommend that everybody in the infertility world would go ahead, guys and girls, go ahead on and just do the methylated version of the folate. And so that would, if you look on the back and it says methylated folate, oftentimes it'll be MTHF or L-MTHF or MTH folate, 1,000 milligrams or micrograms, which is 1 milligram. And that's kind of the standard dose, 800 micrograms to 1,000 micrograms. And if that is in there, not only does that protect the baby, does it increase the chance of fertility? And the answer is yes. Has anybody heard of the gene MTHF? I'm sure people have. So you don't have to know what that means. Everybody calls it the mother-father genes, which is not. But in the infertility world, is there an increased percentage of people with genetic mutations, which are SNPs, at that location? And the answer is yes. So it's already in the general population around 30 or 40%, depending on how you want to think about it. But in this room, it's more likely to be at a higher percentage. So if you have a genetic mutation at this gene, then on the natural side, you need even more broccoli. And you can go and measure that if you want to, but it gets very complex. I would say eat more broccoli and take the supplement. And we live in a culture where 30% of us or whatever are growing up in a culture where our mamas loved us, but they still fed us Cheerios. And there's no folate in there. Well, there is. It's governmentally added, and it's not the kind. And which is my third point there. I would not do folic acid. Now that statement is controversial. But if you go over here to the methylated version, not doing folic acid, there's no harm. So that statement won't increase anybody's chance of harm, but there's somebody in here, if you have that kind of genetic mutation and if you have a homozygote, meaning from both parents, then folic acid could do harm because it can selectively block those receptors that you want the methylated folate to get onto. And then the whole process of methylation won't happen, and that's connected to many things, including hormones and detox and immune system and fertility and all of that. So boiling that all down again, a methylated folate kind and avoiding the folic acid, I think is a pretty good general statement that's very reasonable to do. So in our practice, we found a prenatal vitamin that has those things in it. Number 2, vitamin D. So very clearly, if you are deficient, it helps, clearly. Less clearly if you are insufficient, and then we have to define, well, what is that? And the answer is, we can't know. Because nobody has the book of me on page 37 says, when I'm 51, I need this much vitamin D, and that's what I take. So you have to go out there, and by the way, how do you get vitamin D without taking it? So who in here walks around naked every day? Who in here lives at high longitude, high latitude, and it's cold 8 months out of the year? And nobody's walking around naked. So up there, I'm in Woodland Park, so it's 90% are deficient. And we test everybody. But even in Texas and California, it's 30 or 40%. And then probably 60 to 70% are insufficient if we give it a little bit of a fuzzy factor there. And so what we do is recommend that everybody go outside naked as much as possible, don't get sunburned, and then take your pills. We use a combination K2-D3 at 5,000 units. If you're going to go 5,000 units and above, you should test, because that can go too high. And these days, anybody can test with an online test. It costs whatever it does. And if you're not going to test, then I would probably do less than that. But probably everybody is going to be okay at that 5,000 mark, especially in Colorado. Antioxidants in general. So the most frustrating thing about antioxidants is, it gets lumped into this word and nobody really knows what it is, and we all talk about they're good for you. And where do you get them? Eat your vegetables. Yes, so eat your antioxidants. If you're going to take them, and then you've got 1,000 variations on what these multiple vitamins put in there. And so do they tend to help in infertility? The answer is yes. Okay, so a prenatal vitamin. But then what in that prenatal vitamin is helping you versus you versus you? And then it gets all convoluted and we can't really know. So the bottom line there is have a good prenatal vitamin. I think that is worth it. Okay. And with the exception of zinc. So zinc, which is kind of one of those antioxidants, especially for guys, is connected to submodal sperm function. And so we go ahead and recommend to everybody a zinc glycinate around 20 milligrams. It's not going to do any harm, and it's probably worth it. Number 4, last supplement is omegas. So number 1, go eat the stuff. So, does anybody know what the best fish to eat are? Salmon, red ones. So here's how I boil it down. Smash fish. Smash fish. Sardine, mackerel, anchovy, herring. They're the small ones, and everybody in here is going, ew. Why does everybody go, ew?
Because they taste fishy.
They're oily. And what are we trying to get? And fishiness is the oil. And that's why everybody loves tilapia and mahi-mahi, because those are the white fish, and they're the warm water fish. There's no oil. Tuna and salmon only twice a week. Why? Mercury, heavy metal poisoning, that kind of thing. Why is it concentrated in them? Because what are they eating? The little fish. And they concentrate it in the oil. And then what's the worst kind of fish? The farmed fish, because now you're concentrating and you're not... The farmed fish, they're getting fed, soy and gluten and whatever they're eating. So I would avoid the farmed fish. And what happened to your price? You just doubled it again. So, but hey, anchovies are cheap. So if you say, I want to eat it, go eat some of those. Personally, I'm paying somebody to squeeze it into a little pill. right? And so what we recommend is look on the back of that thing, EPA, DHA, you want to get around 800 total, twice a day. That number is all over the board, and I would just recommend, that's kind of a medium solid dose there. Okay, now, my timing I think was pretty good. I couldn't even see your fingers, but mine says 5 minutes. Okay, so then there's the famous whatabouts, right? Everybody's got whatabouts. And if you go on Google, there's infinite whatabouts. You can find, go and lick tree frogs and you're going to get pregnant page. Somebody wrote a book on that. But here's the big whatabouts. Dairy, gluten, soy, fasting, and the cortisol stuff. So dairy used to be kind of on the not so good list. Less so now. But here's my take on it is many people are dairy protein sensitive. I think everybody should give their body a chance of not doing dairy proteins and seeing what happens. Okay? So we can't vilify dairy, at least according to the data, unless you're dairy sensitive, and then don't do dairy. You can either do an elimination trial or you can do testing. In my book, if you do an elimination trial, especially in the infertility world, it needs to be months, not a few days. I would go 90 days. And so what we tell people is 100 days, 100%. Draw the line on the calendar, draw your tape finish line over here, and make it happen. If you eat dairy, get it from happy cows without the hormones, right? So if these are old-style dairy cattle, grass-fed, grass-finished, they're making 5 gallons a day. You put the hormones in them, they're making 20 or 30 gallons a day. Those cows wear out, they're not happy. And then we get the neuroendocrine disruptors and the hormone emphasis and all that, and that's what's messing us all up. It's messing you guys up down this pathway and other people down other pathways. So, and then your cost goes up with these kind of dairy products, but it's way more tasty, and then don't do it every day. A couple helpings a week, reassess. Gluten. In my opinion, there's many, it's not a fad, it is confusing. Every human has an immunological response to every grain. It's just, is it a little bit, or are you celiac? And everybody's in between. So I would look at every human and say, give your body a chance to see what 90 days without gluten looks like. It won't hurt you, and it might help. It can help you get out of the grain emphasis, or the carbohydrate emphasis, but we can't vilify gluten. It's not that God messed up when he made wheat, it's that we have messed up the whole process of all of these things in our industrialized food system, and we're all sort of stuck there. So you have to intellectually draw a line in the sand and say, okay, I'm not going to do that. Now, what are the caveats? Don't go gluten-free and eat a bunch of gluten-free stuff. Gluten-free muffins are just really worse muffins. It's not healthy. So just get the gluten-free stuff out. I think it's worthwhile if you want to look at, am I gluten sensitive? That's a hard test to do. It's pricey. And then if it comes back into the diet and you say, hey, I think I'm okay on this, well, then it's very whole grain and it's in the context of low carb. So it's not toast every day. It's not sandwich every day and rolls every day. That has to change. Soy. So soy was more strongly implicated and more suspicious. We know it has estrogen metabolic influences, but when you look at the big studies and meta-analyses, it's really not getting a bad rap. But I'm suspicious of soy, but I'm more suspicious of the GMO and the way we produce it than in the product itself. So same kind of, if you're soy sensitive, it's going to impact you. So you either do a elimination or you do testing. And then when it comes back in, it's non-GMO organic edamame, not soy burgers or tofu. You make those kinds of choices, and then you don't fill in the gap with those kinds of things because now you're already full of, well, we'll say cauliflower this time. Okay, fasting. And not to overstep my bounds on time-wise, but fasting, the answer is yes. Right now, everybody in here is fasting. I don't see anybody eating. We all fast. So stop thinking of fasting as an enemy. It's normal. And we live in a culture that has unnormalized it, and now food jumps in your mouth. And now we have to intellectually think, oh, I'm going to fast, and already I'm hungry. It's like already it's a bad day. And in that regard, no different than if we said, hey, go exercise. That doesn't mean that you have to go run 5 miles. There's a vast array of ways that you can exercise, and there's a vast array of the way that you can feed your body, the signals that you can only feed your body by not eating. Think about that one. So one of your inputs is fasting. And then there's intermittent fasting, there's fasting mimicking diets, there's all of those kinds of things, many different ways to do it. Everybody in here does do it. It's not that nobody in here knows how to, nobody in here eats 24/7. So now you turn the corner and you engage and say, okay, let's do a 12-hour, let's skip breakfast, let's do this and that. And lastly, in that line of thing, I would say, there's no place for snacks. It's an American invention. I can't believe I've got, these 3 kids and the snack culture that we live in, and to say no to myself is hard enough. To say no time and time again to other people in the family is impossible. And to tell Americans not to have snacks, it's like you're tortured. It's like you're being unfair. And I would say, okay, and everybody in here is going to have their relationship with their snacks, and none of what I have said is morally right or wrong, but it's how do you give your body what it needs to be becoming the kind of person that you want to become.